Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a wedding reception, white roses on gold-trimmed tables, violins playing in the background, champagne flutes clinking in a room full of tailored suits and sparkling gowns. But just off to the side, hidden behind a potted plant, there's a single folding chair, next to a trash can. And that chair has my name on it. You might not survive this one because tonight isn't just about weddings and glitter. It's about dignity. And what happens when the people you love most forget you're human. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And comment your city and local time down below. I want to see just how far my story reaches. Now turn off the lights, maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. And I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived at the venue and couldn't find my name on the seating chart. It was one of those big, elegant boards in calligraphy, alphabetical by last name, the kind where every letter looked like it was signing a check. Carter, Carter, Blake, Blake. No Helen Carter. My fingers hovered over the list. I squinted, thinking maybe I'd missed it. I even checked under Mitchell just in case they'd used my maiden name. Nothing. "Excuse me," I said to a young woman with a clipboard nearby. She looked all of 22 and radiated stress beneath her practiced smile. "I don't seem to see my name here. I'm Helen Carter, mother of the groom." Her smile faltered for the briefest second like a flicker of power outage. "Oh, one moment, I'll check with the bride." And off she went, heels clacking, like an alarm bell, leaving me standing there in my carefully chosen navy blue dress. I'd spent 3 months finding that dress. Had the hem let out and the bodice taken in. Bought special shapewear. I even wore the pearl earrings Eric gave me on my 60th birthday. This was my son's wedding, and somehow I felt like an uninvited guest. The young woman returned with someone behind her. Not just someone Madison, my daughter-in-law, the bride. She looked stunning, of course. Flowing white gown, blonde hair styled in an updo that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Madison had that brand of confidence only a woman who'd never heard the word no could carry. "Oh, Helen," she gushed, voice sugary and cold all at once. "I'm so sorry for the mix-up. We had to make some last-minute changes to the seating." "Of course, dear," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Where would you like me to sit?" Her smile widened not kindly. "Follow me. I've got a special spot just for you." A special spot? My heart softened a little. Maybe this was her olive branch. After all our tense interactions over the last year, maybe she was offering a peace token on her big day. She led me past the ballroom, past the main tables, past the beautiful floral centerpieces and silver chargers, past the family of the bride sign, past friends of the groom. And then around a corner, just before the coat check, she stopped. "Here we are," she said, beaming. I stared. A metal folding chair, next to a large silver trash can, half covered by a potted fern that had seen better days. "I don't understand." She laughed, light and crisp. "It's your seat, right next to the trash can. It's perfect, don't you think?" My mouth went dry, my hands shook. This can't be serious. "Oh, but it is," she said, that smile still glued to her face. "Don't be so dramatic, Helen. It's just a little joke. Very on brand for you, don't you think?" Before I could answer, Eric appeared. My son, my only child. Black tuxedo hair, neatly slicked back, smile like a flashbulb. "Mom," he called. "Did Madison show you your seat?" I turned toward him, hope swelling in my chest. He'd fix this. He had to. His arm wrapped around Madison's waist as she leaned into him. "Pretty funny, right?" I blinked. "You can't possibly think this is appropriate," I said carefully. He shrugged. "Come on, Mom, don't be so sensitive. It's a joke. You're always so serious." From behind us, I could hear whispers. Other guests had noticed the little gathering. Some chuckled, some looked away. One woman actually took out her phone. "See," Madison said loudly. "She can't take a joke." No wonder Eric wanted to keep some distance from all that negativity. More laughter. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. I looked to Eric again, silently begging him to remember who I was. The woman who'd raised him alone, who'd worked 2 jobs so he could go to college, who'd packed lunches and paid overdue bills and held him through breakups and illness and disappointment. But he was looking at Madison, only Madison. "Well," I said, finally, my voice thin but steady, "I suppose I should thank you for making your feelings so clear." And with that, I sat down in the folding chair, as gracefully as I could. The metal was cold. The garbage can smelled faintly of shrimp cocktail and wilted lettuce. I folded my hands in my lap and stared straight ahead as the laughter died down and the wedding rolled on without me. They thought I'd cry, or leave, or cause a scene. But I didn't, because something had started to shift inside me, a quiet ancient thing, the kind of thing that doesn't shout, it plans. And as I sat there beside the trash can listening to the toasts and the laughter, a memory stirred. One I hadn't thought of in months. A phone call I'd overheard, a due date that had never made sense, and a pair of brown eyes that didn't match a single soul in my family. They wanted to treat me like I was disposable. Fine. Let's see what they'd do. When the truth showed up at their polished little table. I barely slept that night. Even after I took off the navy dress and hung it carefully on the padded hanger in my closet, still smelling faintly of roses and roasted lamb, I sat on the edge of my bed in complete silence. You ever feel like something inside you cracks but doesn't shatter all at once? It's more like a hairline fracture. Small, subtle. But you know the break is there. That was me. Sitting in the dark, still wearing my heels, staring at a wedding favor. Some fancy little jar of honey with a gold ribbon and a sticker that said, "Love is sweet." I held it like it was evidence in a trial, and maybe it was. Earlier that day, I'd sat behind a potted plant at my son's wedding, watched him dance with his bride while I fought back tears and kept my dignity in check. But the real problem wasn't the garbage can. It wasn't even the joke. It was the way Eric looked at me, like I was the one being ridiculous. That broke something. And in the quiet stillness of my house that night, all I could hear was that memory from months ago bubbling back up with fresh urgency. It was a Friday afternoon, about 3 months before the wedding. I had stopped by their apartment to drop off a piece of mail, a tax form that had been sent to my address by mistake. I'd hoped to see Caleb for a few minutes. I'd even brought a little plush elephant, one of those soft gray ones with the crinkly ears babies love. When I got to the door, I could hear Madison on the phone. Her voice was sharp. Not that usual sugary tone she put on when Eric was around. This was different. Cold, fast, unfiltered. "You need to stay away. I told you this life is mine now. I'm married. It's over. We're done." Then silence. A long pause. She opened the door moments later, her face flushed, her mascara just slightly smudged like she'd rubbed her eyes a little too hard. Helen, what a surprise." I smiled, holding up the envelope. "Just dropping this off. Thought maybe I could see Caleb, too, if it's a good time." She glanced behind her. I couldn't see anything except the hallway light. "Actually, this really isn't a good time," she said quickly. "Caleb's napping and I've got a bunch of work calls coming up. You know how it is." But I didn't. I didn't know how any of it was. Because for the past few months, Madison had slowly, methodically cut me out. Fewer invitations, shorter replies, longer silences. And that phone call, it stuck with me like a pebble in a shoe. At first, I brushed it off. We all have messy moments, right? Maybe it was a customer, a telemarketer. But the tone, the words, they weren't business. They were personal. And now, they echoed louder than ever. Back at the wedding, I'd had 3 hours to sit with myself, to think, to go over every strange moment since the day Eric had introduced Madison to me. It had been at my house on a Sunday afternoon. I'd made pot roast. Nothing fancy, just something comforting. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a white linen jumpsuit and a tense smile. "Damon's told me so much about you," she'd said, though she called him Eric now. I always slip and say Damon. That's what I called him as a baby. Little D, my son. But she changed it, reinvented him. Within 6 weeks, they were engaged. 3 months after that, she was pregnant. I remembered asking Eric gently, "Are you sure this isn't moving too fast?" He'd waved me off. "Mom, you always worry too much." When Caleb was born 7 months later, Madison claimed he was premature, but he weighed 8 pounds, full cheeks, strong lungs, big alert eyes that didn't resemble Eric's piercing blues or Madison's sea glass greens. They were brown, deep and serious, and oddly familiar. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Genetics can be unpredictable. Babies can look like distant relatives. But as he got older, Caleb began to look even less like either of them. He had this sharp jawline, high cheekbones, a very specific dimple near his left eye. One night, I was holding him while Madison stepped into the kitchen and he turned his little face toward the lamp. And it hit me. He looked like someone just not Eric. And now that voice on the phone, the anger, the panic, I told you. I'm married now, it's over. It hadn't been a telemarketer. It had been him, whoever he was. And that night, after the wedding humiliation, I sat in bed thinking about every red flag I had ignored. Every moment I'd chalked up to young people being young. Every instinct I'd buried beneath a smile. Until something very real and very cold settled in my chest. I needed to know the truth. Not just for me, but for my son. And for Caleb. Because if the foundation was cracked, eventually, everything would fall. The next morning I made a list. It wasn't long. Eric's blood type. Madison's supposed due date. My memory of that hospital visit. The name Connor, just a hunch. It had popped into my head for some reason. Maybe she'd let it slip before. And then in shaky handwriting at the bottom, private investigator. It felt ridiculous, dramatic, like something you only saw in crime shows. But there I was, on a Sunday morning, with my coffee untouched and a hollow ache in my chest, flipping through the yellow pages and Googling discreet investigation services in my area. And that's when I found her. Sandra Bell, former detective, now working privately. Her website had a single quote on it. "The truth matters especially when nobody else believes you." That was enough. I picked up the phone and dialed. Sandra Bell answered on the third ring. Her voice was calm, even like someone who'd heard every kind of story and didn't need you to apologize for telling yours. "Bell Investigations," she said. "How can I help you?" I took a breath and said the line I'd been rehearsing in my head since sunrise. "My name is Helen Carter. I need to find out if my grandson is actually related to my son." There was a pause. Not a stunned silence, not judgment, just a moment of processing. "I assume you're not looking to publish the results in a family newsletter," she said dryly. That made me laugh, a short surprised sound. I liked her instantly. "No," I replied. "I'm just looking for the truth." We set up an appointment for the next afternoon. Her office was located in a sleepy little strip mall wedged between a tax preparation service and a donut shop. Very unassuming. No big frosted windows or private detective cliches. When I arrived, she opened the door herself. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, faded navy blazer, the kind of woman who'd seen some things but didn't wear them like badges. "I don't deal in gossip," she said as I sat down. "If you're looking for dirt, you're in the wrong place. But if what you're after is clarity facts, I can help." I nodded. "I think my son's wife lied about the paternity of their child. I think she got pregnant before she met him and passed the baby off as his." Sandra pulled out a legal pad and clicked her pen once. "Let's walk through everything you know. Start from the top." I told her about the whirlwind courtship, how Madison had shown up like a weather front, fast-moving, full of pressure changes and impossible to predict. I told her about Caleb's birth, how the timeline didn't add up, how 8-pound premature babies weren't exactly common. I told her about the wedding seeding joke and how it finally snapped something loose in me. And then I told her about the phone call, the voice I'd overheard on the other side of the door. "I think she's hiding something," I said. "And I think that man, whoever he was, deserves to know about Caleb." Sandra's expression didn't change as she took notes, but I could tell she was seeing patterns form. "Did she ever mention living somewhere before she met your son?" "Yes. She told us she'd moved here from Portland." Sandra nodded, tapping her pen on the desk. "I'll start there," she said. "I'll look into her previous address history, any records of long-term relationships, hospital visits, even photos. And I'll look for a name, maybe a connection to this mystery man. And if you find someone..." She looked me square in the eye. "Then we'll talk about the next step, DNA. It's strange the things that keep you up at night once you've ignited a flame like this. I wasn't just chasing a hunch anymore. I was lighting a match in a house full of secrets, and I didn't know which ones might explode. What if I was wrong? What if I'd let my feelings, my pride, get ahead of facts? But what if I was right? What if my son was devoting his life to raising someone else's child, while the real father had no idea he had a son? Every time I thought about Caleb's little face, those serious brown eyes, the furrowed little brow, the dimple, my certainty grew. I didn't want to ruin lives. I just wanted the truth to step out of the shadows. 3 days later, Sandra called me back. "Can you come in this afternoon?" she said. "Did you find something?" There was a pause. "Yes, quite a bit, actually." Back at her office, she laid a folder on the desk between us. Inside was a stack of printed documents, 2 photographs, and 1 business card. Madison lived in Portland for 4 years before she moved here, Sandra began. During that time, she worked at a boutique marketing firm. Pretty low level, but enough to get by. Her address was a small apartment in Northeast Portland. She slid one of the photographs toward me. It was Madison sitting at an outdoor cafe laughing with a tall man. He had dark hair, olive skin, strong features, and unmistakable brown eyes. His arm was draped casually over her shoulders. "This is Brandon Ellis," Sandra said. They dated for 2 years, moved in together during the last 8 months. I stared at the photo, my stomach twisted. "He looks just like—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. Sandra nodded. "He's now a software developer, still living in Portland, hasn't had a serious relationship since Madison. And here's where it gets more interesting. She broke up with him suddenly, left town within a week, said she had a job offer she couldn't pass up. And the timing," I asked. 6 weeks before she met your son." My heart dropped. "She was already pregnant," I whispered. Sandra handed me the second photo. This one of Brandon alone at what looked like a wedding reception. Same angular features, same dimples. According to mutual friends, he was devastated when she left. He suspected she might have been pregnant, but she wouldn't take his calls. "Does he know about Caleb?" "No," she said, "but I did reach out carefully. He remembers her, and he's still curious, still wondering." I placed the photo back on the desk and closed the folder. "Do you want to move forward?" Sandra asked. "With DNA testing." I nodded slowly. "But how will I get a sample?" Her expression was gentle but clear. "That part's up to you." That night, I stared into the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me didn't seem old anymore. She seemed awake, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out my planner and flipped to the weekend. Eric had mentioned dinner. Maybe this time, I'd go. And maybe I'd bring Caleb a gift, one that required a spoon. Dinner at Eric and Madison's place was set for Sunday at 6 p.m., and I arrived right on time. Not a minute early, not a minute late, just like old times. I brought a basket of warm dinner rolls, his favorite growing up. Fluffy on the inside, slightly crisp on the outside, brushed with butter, and a sprinkle of rosemary. The smell alone could hug you. And in my purse, zipped in an inside pocket, was a small, resealable plastic bag. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel sneaky. I felt steady, like a lighthouse before a storm. Madison opened the door wearing a cream sweater dress and a smile just tight enough to qualify as effort. "Hi, Helen, you look nice," she said, stepping aside. "Thank you. And you smell like cinnamon and anxiety," I thought, but instead said, "That roast smells wonderful." Eric appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, grinning like nothing had ever been wrong between us. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek, "those rolls better be what I think they are." "Homemade," I replied, holding up the basket, straight from the oven. "You're the best." Those words used to warm me. Tonight they felt more like borrowed phrases, something someone says because they're supposed to, not because they mean it. And then I saw Caleb. He was in his high chair, cheeks flushed, babbling at a sippy cup he kept tipping upside down. His face lit up when he saw me, and it almost broke my heart. So innocent, so sweet, so unaware of the cracks beneath the floorboards. "Hi, little man," I whispered gently, brushing a curl from his forehead. Dinner was by all accounts a success. The roast was perfectly cooked, the green beans had just the right snap, and the dinner rolls, if I do say so myself, vanished in minutes. Madison was in full hostess mode, warm, smiling, attentive. It was the most human I'd seen her in months. She even laughed at one of my jokes, though I think it may have been for show. Then came dessert. Caleb had his own bowl of mashed bananas and was handed a bright red plastic spoon, the kind toddlers love because it's just the right size for making a mess. This was my chance. I reached across the table. Can I help feed him? I miss doing that. Madison looked unsure, but Eric spoke up. Of course, he loves you. He doesn't know any better, I thought bitterly. But I smiled and walked around the table. Caleb's little fingers were sticky with banana, and the spoon was already coated in drool and fruit by the time I took it from him. You've got strong little hands, I whispered, holding his as he grabbed the spoon again. I guided it gently, chatting with him, letting him smear banana across his cheeks and shirt. It was beautiful, familiar chaos. After a few minutes, Madison stood to clear some plates. Let me help you, I said quickly. I'll rinse this. She waved it off. I've got it. No, it's the least I can do. I walked to the sink, rinsed the spoon, quickly dried it, and in one swift movement, slipped it into the plastic bag tucked in my purse. I replaced it with a nearly identical clean spoon from their drawer. Thank God for cheap toddler sets with duplicates. I smiled through the rest of dessert like nothing had happened. But inside I was shaking. The next morning, I met Sandra at the lab. She worked with a simple beige building in a quiet strip of professional offices. The walls smelled like printer paper and lemon floor cleaner. The technician, a woman named Lisa, handled the sample with care. This will be compared against the DNA your son submitted 2 years ago for a health screening, Sandra explained. It's still in the system and legally accessible with his consent. He checked the box for future research usage. I nodded my stomach tight. How long? 3 to 5 business days, Lisa said. We'll call you as soon as we know. As we walked back to the parking lot, Sandra asked the question I'd been avoiding. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to jump off a cliff. Only I'm not sure if there's water below or rocks. She didn't respond right away. Then finally, you're braver than most. I shook my head. I'm not brave, I'm just tired of being ignored. She smiled. Same thing sometimes. Those next few days passed in a strange fog. I went to work. I read. I took long walks. I even started baking a bit just to pass the hours. But my mind was always circling. What if I was wrong? What if I'd let my emotions run wild? What if my need to feel important again had led me down a path that didn't need walking? But then I'd look at a photo of Caleb, or remember that phone call, or replay Madison's venom-laced smile at the wedding, and the doubts would clear like clouds burned off by morning sun. On Friday afternoon, Sandra called. Can you come by the office? She said. We have your results. My mouth went dry. Let's talk in person. Those were the longest 22 minutes of my life. Her office felt smaller this time, like the truth was taking up extra space. Sandra didn't waste time. She slid a paper across the desk, a single sheet. The test is conclusive, she said. I read it. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Caleb Carter is not the biological child of Eric Carter. The words didn't explode. They landed like a stone at the bottom of a deep well. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. I was right, I whispered. Sandra didn't say anything. She just let me sit in that moment. I folded the paper carefully and placed it in my purse. What do I do now? She leaned forward. That depends. You can tell Eric privately, or you can make sure no one gets to spin it first. I thought of the folding chair, the garbage can, the way Madison looked at me like I didn't matter. I straightened my spine. I'm not going to whisper the truth, I said. Not this time. Sandra nodded. Then let's plan your next move. I knew it had to be public. I didn't want whispers or reinterpretations or carefully rewritten family narratives. I wanted clarity. I wanted receipts. And Madison, well, she had chosen to humiliate me in front of 100 people with a trash can and a folding chair. I'd let that moment go then because I didn't have power. But now I had truth, and it was heavier than any pearl earring or wedding centerpiece. So when Madison called me 2 days later with a chipper, overly sweet tone in her voice, I already knew this would be my moment. Helen, she sang through the phone. Eric and I were thinking of having a little get-together for Caleb. He's about to walk, and we just thought it would be nice to have both families together. Low-key, backyard vibe. My fingers tightened around my phone. What a lovely idea, I said calmly. What can I bring? Oh, nothing, just you. And maybe your famous dinner rolls, my parents loved them. I'll bring them, I replied, keeping my voice soft like lace over steel. Thank you for including me. She had no idea she'd just extended the invitation to her own undoing. The backyard party was held the following Saturday. Warm sunshine, white folding chairs, a big blue banner that said "Look Who's Walking" hung between two trees. Tables were set with checkered tablecloths and mason jars full of lemonade. Everything was very Pinterest perfect. I arrived with my basket of rolls and a thin manila envelope tucked into my handbag. I had copies of the DNA results, a photo of Brandon Ellis, and a short typed timeline I drafted just in case anyone tried to confuse the facts. Yes, it was dramatic. No, I didn't regret a second of it. Madison's parents, Charles and Linda Blake, were there sipping wine and making small talk with the neighbors. Madison's sister, Ashley, blonde and radiant, was tossing a ball with Caleb across the lawn while Eric grilled burgers on the patio, laughing as if the world hadn't tilted 3 inches off its axis. It almost made me second-guess myself. Almost. But then I caught Madison's eye. She smiled that tight, fake smile again, the one that never reached her eyes. And I remembered the sound of her voice on the phone telling someone, "It's over. I'm married now." No, I wasn't second-guessing anything. After lunch, the moment came. Let's all gather around, Madison called brightly. Caleb's been taking steps, and I think he's ready to show off. The guests clapped. Phones were raised. Eric knelt on the grass with his arms outstretched, while Madison helped Caleb stand a few feet away. "Come on, sweet boy," she cooed. Caleb took 1 step, then another, a wobble, and then 3 solid solo steps before he tumbled onto the grass. Everyone erupted in cheers, and just like that, the moment was perfect, which made it the perfect time to ruin it. I stepped forward, clearing my throat softly. "Excuse me, everyone. I know this is a special day, and Caleb's doing wonderfully, but I have something I need to share, something important, and it can't wait." Madison's eyes snapped to mine. Eric blinked. "Mom." I took the envelope from my purse and held it gently like a snow globe about to be shaken. 2 weeks ago, I had a DNA test conducted on Caleb, I said. Gasps. Literal gasps. Madison's mother put her wine glass down so fast it tipped over. Eric stood. "Wait, what?" I needed to know, I continued. Something wasn't sitting right. The timing of the pregnancy, the lack of resemblance, the voice on the phone that day. Madison's face was white now, but I wasn't finished. The results showed with 99.9% certainty that Caleb is not your biological son, Eric. The yard went silent. No birds, no breeze, no barbecue smoke. Just stunned faces frozen in place. No, Madison whispered, "That's not possible. You had no right." I had every right, I said, calm but fierce. Because I raised my son with honesty and sacrifice, and you tried to take that from him, from all of us. I handed the envelope to Eric. His hands trembled as he opened it. And then I turned to Madison and spoke the words I'd practiced in the mirror. Eric deserves better than this lie. Caleb deserves to know who he really is, and so does his father. I pulled out the photo of Brandon Ellis and held it up for all to see. His name is Brandon. He lives in Portland. He's been looking for Madison for 2 years, ever since she disappeared from his life, while carrying his child. Madison collapsed onto the nearest chair like someone had cut her strings. Eric stared at the paper in his hands as if the letters were written in fire. "I trusted you," he said quietly. "I trusted you with everything." "I loved you," Madison said, tears streaming now. "I didn't know what else to do. You were good to me, and I needed stability." I stepped back. "You didn't need love. You needed cover." The rest happened fast. Madison's father stormed off. Her sister muttered, "Unbelievable," and followed. Linda Blake tried to scold me until she saw the evidence with her own eyes, and then she turned to comfort her daughter. Eric didn't say anything for a long time. He just held Caleb, who was now fussing from all the tension, and sat down on the patio steps. Eventually, he looked at me. "I can't believe this is my life," he said. I sat beside him. It's still your life, I told him gently. It's just the version with the truth now. He laughed bitterly. You really brought the receipts, didn't you? I figured I'd return the favor, I said. After the folding chair. That made him laugh for real, just once. But it was enough. You're not mad I didn't believe you sooner, he asked. No, I said, looking at Caleb toddling toward a juice box. I'm just glad you know now, and what you choose next, that's up to you. He nodded slowly. I want to meet Brandon, he said. I think Caleb deserves to know the truth, too. That evening, I drove home and took the longest bath I've had in years. Epsom salts, candles, the whole 9 yards. Because I knew the fight wasn't over. But I had won the first battle. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of love. For my son, for the child caught in the middle. And for myself, the woman who finally stood up and said, this is not how my story ends. The week after the backyard reveal felt like I was walking through smoke after a house fire. Everything had shifted, but the world kept pretending like it hadn't. Eric moved into a hotel the next day. He didn't tell Madison he was going, just packed a single suitcase and left while she was at her yoga class. When I called to check on him, he sounded hollow but calm. I didn't yell, he said, didn't scream, just left. That was how he handled things, always had. Even as a kid, Eric was never the door slammer or tantrum thrower. He just shut down and walked away when things hurt too much. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do next, he told me, but I knew I couldn't sleep another night in that house. I understood. That house was filled with ghosts now. Not the kind that float or wail, but the kind that whisper lies in your ear while you change diapers and plan futures. Shalom. 2 days later, Sandra called again. I spoke with Brandon, she said. He's willing to come here. I told him there's no legal order for paternity yet, but he said he wants to meet his son. How's he handling all this? I asked. Honestly, he's overwhelmed. He still cared about Madison even after she left. But he's clear about one thing, he's not going to stay silent anymore. I sat down at my kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear, staring at a smudge on my coffee mug that looked vaguely like an arrow. How do you tell a child that the person they think is their father? Isn't I asked. You don't, Sandra said softly. Not yet. Caleb is too young to understand, but he deserves a life built on truth. And that starts now with the adults. Brandon arrived 3 days later. I agreed to meet him first before he saw Eric or Caleb, just to feel him out. I needed to know what kind of man he was. He met me at a local cafe, a quiet spot with dark wood tables and chipped ceramic mugs. He wore jeans and a navy windbreaker, his hair slightly messy from travel. He looked nervous. Mrs. Carter, he asked, standing as I approached. Helen, I corrected, shaking his hand. He looked so much like Caleb that my breath caught for just a moment. The same eyes, same posture even, as if genetics had a blueprint for the soul, not just the bones. I don't really know what to say, he admitted, sitting down. I never thought I'd see her again, and now there's a child. Have you told your family? I asked. My sister knows. She cried. My mom's cautious. She wants proof, but she says the eyes are enough. I smiled gently. I know that feeling. We talked for almost an hour. He told me about his life in Portland, his job as a software developer, his apartment above a bookstore, his dog, his Sunday morning routine at the farmer's market. He was kind, grounded, real. Not flashy, not manipulative, nothing like Madison. When we finally stood to leave, he said something I'll never forget. I don't want to take Caleb away from anyone. I just want to be part of his story, even if it's complicated. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a little hope. Eric met Brandon that same evening. I didn't go, I offered, but Eric said he needed to do this alone. I waited by the phone like a teenager waiting for prom night feedback. He called just before 10 p.m. He's not what I expected. How so? He's calm, patient, seems like a decent guy. There was a pause. He brought a photo album, had pictures of him as a baby. You know what's weird? Caleb looks just like him at that age. It's almost undeniable. I didn't say I told you so. I just listened. He cried, Eric said after a beat. Brandon, when he talked about not knowing, about losing 2 years with his son, he just cried. And you? I asked. I didn't cry, he said quietly, but I felt something shift. The custody process began a few days later. Madison, to her credit, or maybe to avoid legal embarrassment, didn't put up much of a fight. Her parents had apparently put pressure on her to make this go away quietly, especially after news of the DNA test had circulated through their country club circles. Reputation mattered more than reality in their world. Brandon was granted legal paternity within a month. Eric, for now, retained visitation rights based on his emotional connection, according to the judge. Caleb was too young to notice the difference. He still lit up when Eric entered the room. He still babbled excitedly when Brandon picked him up. He still chewed on books and squealed at Elmo and threw Cheerios with chaotic purpose. In a child's world, the faces that smile and the arms that hold you are what count. But the rest of us, we were relearning how to define family. One Saturday afternoon, Eric and I met at the park for coffee. We sat on a bench while kids screamed happily across the playground and strollers rattled by like distant tambourines. "Do you hate her?" he asked me suddenly. "Madison." He nodded. "No," I said, "not anymore." He raised an eyebrow. "That's surprising." I think she was scared. Selfish, yes. Manipulative, absolutely. But also scared. And people do foolish things when they think their world is about to collapse. He sipped his coffee thoughtful. "I think I wanted to marry the idea of her," he admitted. The beauty, the ease, the illusion of everything being smooth. I gave him a sideways glance. "You always did prefer your peanut butter without chunks." He laughed. "Still do." I looked out across the park. "Truth isn't always comfortable, Eric, but it's clean. You can build on it." He nodded slowly. "I'm not angry anymore, just tired." Tired is a good place to start healing. Later that evening, he sent me a photo, Brandon and Caleb reading together on the couch, sunlight pouring through the window. Caleb's chubby finger pointing at something in the book, while Brandon smiled. My son's life had been upended, his future rewritten, his heart cracked. But maybe, just maybe, it would heal in new shapes, stronger ones. And as for me, I had a front row seat this time. Not behind a fern, not beside a trash can, right where I belonged. You know that moment when a storm finally passes and you step outside expecting chaos, but instead you find a strange quiet. Not peace, exactly, but stillness. That's where I was. Madison had all but disappeared. After the DNA results and the legal documents, she packed up Caleb's things and moved back in with her parents in Connecticut. Eric had officially filed for an annulment citing fraud and paternity deception. Her lawyer didn't argue. There wasn't much ground to stand on. At first, I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, like the queen in a courtroom drama who slams down the folder of evidence and watches the jury gasp. But that feeling never came. What did come was something softer and heavier. Grief. Not for the lie itself, but for everything it had stolen. Time. Trust. The easy kind of love that comes before betrayal. Eric was doing better than I expected. He threw himself into work. He met up with Brandon twice a week so they could co-parent Caleb the best way they knew how. And Brandon, bless him, was remarkably generous about it. "I don't want to erase Eric," he told me once over coffee. He was there when I wasn't. That matters. I hadn't expected kindness from him, but there it was. And sometimes kindness is the most disarming thing of all. One afternoon, I found myself wandering through an old bookstore near downtown. One of those places where the shelves lean just slightly and every book smells like dust and stories. I picked up a novel about late-in-life reinvention and laughed quietly. The woman on the cover looked vaguely like me. Gray hair, determined eyes. Maybe a little too optimistic, but still. "Any good?" a voice asked from behind. I turned to see a woman around my age holding a stack of gardening books. She smiled warm and curious. Honestly, I said I just liked her cardigan. She laughed. "That's how I choose wine, based on the label." We talked for 20 minutes. Her name was Laura, widowed, used to be a piano teacher, had recently downsized and was trying to learn how to garden on a shaded patio. We exchanged numbers. It wasn't romantic, not in the slightest, but it was something. Connection. The kind I hadn't felt in years. Later that week, I got a text from Brandon. "Hey, I'm putting together a little birthday picnic for Caleb next weekend. Just a few friends and family. Eric's coming. Would love to have you there. I stared at the message for a long time. 1 year ago, I'd sat beside a trash can at the wedding of that child's supposed parents. Now I was being invited to his real father's picnic with my son, not as an afterthought, but as family. Life doesn't circle back. It curves, it loops, and sometimes it surprises you. The picnic was in a quiet park nestled between 2 apartment complexes. Brandon had brought handmade sandwiches and fruit skewers. Eric showed up with a little soccer ball. Caleb wore a floppy sun hat that made him look like a baby tourist on his first cruise. When I arrived, Caleb came toddling over and flung his sticky arms around my legs, like I was the last friend at the party. I scooped him up. "Hi there, birthday boy." He babbled something about ducks and blueberries, and for a moment the past didn't matter. It was just a warm day, a boy with cake on his cheeks, and 3 adults doing their very best to figure it all out. At one point, I sat on a park bench while Brandon and Eric pushed Caleb on the baby swings. Laura, the woman from the bookstore, texted me during that moment. "Found a plant that thrives in shade. Progress. Want to come see?" I smiled, typed back. "I'd love that." And I meant it. That evening, Eric and I sat on the back patio at his new apartment. He'd moved into a place with big windows and hardwood floors, simple, clean, and his. "I miss a lot of things," he said suddenly. "Like what?" He was quiet for a while. Not Madison exactly, but the idea of having it all figured out. A marriage, a child, a future. I reached over and handed him a glass of iced tea. Having it all figured out is overrated. Most of us are just improvising. He smirked. "You always sound like a fortune cookie when you say stuff like that." I laughed. "Age gives you the right to sound wise. Doesn't mean we are." He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" "What?" "That you didn't give up on me, even when I treated you like garbage." My throat tightened. "You weren't garbage. You were lost. There's a difference." He looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes weren't full of weight. "Thank you, Mom." I reached over and patted his knee. "You were worth fighting for." Done. Later that night, I stood in my kitchen barefoot on the cool tile and stared at the manila envelope where I'd once kept the DNA results. It was empty now. Shredded, burned, gone. There was no need to hold on to it anymore. I had the only evidence I needed. A son who'd come home. A baby who still reached for me. And a voice in my own head that finally said, "You did the right thing." The months that followed weren't a fairy tale. They weren't tied with a bow or wrapped in glitter. There were no dramatic reunions, no tearful apologies aired in front of dinner guests. Real life doesn't work that way, not at 70, and definitely not when your family tree has been shaken that hard. But there was movement. There was breath. There was healing. Slow, gritty, imperfect healing. And I'll take that over a perfect lie any day. Brandon settled into our town gradually. He rented a modest 2-bedroom near the park, so Caleb would have plenty of green space, and Eric lived less than 15 minutes away. The 2 of them began an unspoken routine alternating weekends, weekday dinners, FaceTime calls that sometimes lasted 15 minutes, sometimes just 5. They weren't co-parents in the traditional sense, more like co-navigators of a small human's emotional galaxy. One evening, Brandon invited me to his place for dinner. Nothing fancy, pasta salad, a bottle of mid-shelf wine. Caleb was already in his pajamas, blue fleece, with yellow moons and babbling about trucks and ducks and who knows what. After we'd eaten, and the baby was asleep, Brandon sat down across from me and folded his hands like a man about to make a confession. "I didn't think I'd ever get this," he said. "This, a second chance, at being a dad, at doing it right." I studied his face. It was honest, tired, hopeful. "You didn't lose the first one," I said. "You were just kept from it. That's different." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you forgive her?" I thought about that. Madison had moved to Connecticut and wasn't fighting the custody terms. She sent cards for Caleb's milestones, first haircut, first dentist visit, but never asked for video calls. She'd vanished from the scene, leaving only a trace behind. "Forgiveness," I said carefully, "isn't a door I open for her. It's one I unlock for myself." Brandon smiled. "You really do talk like a therapist sometimes." "No," I grinned. "Therapists get paid." Meanwhile, Eric was changing too. He'd started volunteering with a local after-school program that helped teenagers with college prep and career advice. He showed them how to build resumes and how to tie a tie and how not to trust a company that calls itself a family. "I think I needed something to give myself away to," he told me one afternoon. "Something that wouldn't fall apart in my hands." "You're not broken," I said. "You're just bruised." "There's a difference." "Of course. Bruises heal. Breaks take longer." He nodded like he was letting that truth soak into his bones. One day in early spring, I took Caleb to the library. Not for story time or puppet shows, just because I missed the smell of books and the feeling of soft carpet under sensible shoes. He toddled between shelves like he owned the place, pulling down board books and pointing at pictures like he was writing his own reviews. At one point, he brought me a book with a picture of a fox and said very seriously, "Papa read." I looked at him, startled. "Papa," he nodded. "Papa read book." I blinked. That was what he'd started calling Brandon. And it hit me that in his little world, there was space for two men, for Papa and for Dada. And that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't grow up haunted by confusion, but instead surrounded by love. That's the thing no one tells you. Love doesn't have to follow genetics. It can sprout in unexpected places, like wildflowers in concrete. Later that night, I journaled about it. I'd started journaling again, something I hadn't done since before Eric was born. It wasn't profound or pretty, just scratchy handwriting and half-finished thoughts. That day I wrote, "Caleb called Brandon Papa." Eric didn't flinch. Maybe love is just choosing to stay when it would be easier to walk away. I closed the journal and sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the streetlights flicker on like fireflies born from electricity. This life I was living, it wasn't what I'd imagined, but it was real. And sometimes real is enough. About a week later, Laura invited me to a local arts event, a gallery walk featuring local photographers and painters. We met for coffee beforehand, and she handed me a small flyer with a sheepish smile. "Just in case you want to try it next time," she said. "They're always looking for new artists." I stared at the paper. There in bold serif font were the words, "Call for submissions. Next, chapter artists over 60 and still creating." Something about it made my chest tighten. "I haven't picked up a camera in years," I said. "You picked up your son," she replied, "and the pieces of your life. Same thing." That was the thing about Laura. She had a way of saying something soft that still cracked your ribs open. So I submitted a photo. Just one. It was a picture I'd taken of Caleb in the park, one hand clutching Brandon's fingers, the other reaching for Eric, blurry in the background. The moment between two fathers. I titled it, "The Space Between." 2 weeks later, I got an email. It had been accepted. The night of the gallery walk, I wore a blue linen dress and the earrings Eric gave me years ago. Not pearls this time, turquoise. Something with a little more edge. When I stood next to my photo, a woman tapped my shoulder. "Is this yours?" she asked. "Yes." "It made me cry," she said. I smiled. Good. Because sometimes tears mean release. When I got home, Eric called. I saw the photo he said. "Brandon showed me. It's beautiful, Mom." "Thank you." "I'm proud of you." My throat caught. "That means more than you know." "You saved me," he said quietly. And I didn't say no, I just told the truth. I didn't say, "You would have figured it out eventually." I just said what mattered. I'm glad you see it now. I didn't expect to become known around town, not in the way that matters to most people. But after the gallery walk, a few surprising things started happening. At the farmer's market, the woman selling honey leaned across her table and said, "I saw your photo at the exhibit. The space between." "That was yours, right?" When I nodded, she smiled and handed me a small jar. "On the house. You gave me goosebumps." At the library where I'd volunteered for nearly 12 years, one of the teen patrons, Jeremy, quiet, awkward, always in a hoodie, slid me a sketch he'd done of the photo. It was rough, but stunning in its own way. Shadows and charcoal. The same sense of pause and presence. "You made that from memory?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. It just stuck in my head. Art has a strange way of planting seeds you didn't know you were carrying." That same week, Laura convinced me to join a local creative writing group that met every other Thursday in the basement of the rec center. Just 5 women all over 60 writing stories that sounded like confessions, fairy tales, and sometimes weather reports from the soul. The first time I shared a piece, it was a short reflection on grief. Not dramatic, just a memory about Eric's 3rd birthday when his father had already left, and all I had in the fridge was cake mix and mustard. After I read it, no one spoke for a moment. Then Laura reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't just write memories," she whispered. "You carve them." I didn't know how much I needed to hear that until the tears hit the back of my eyes. Meanwhile, life with Eric and Brandon and Caleb found its rhythm. Eric had moved into a townhouse 2 blocks from Brandon's. That wasn't by accident. They'd made the decision together, one of those quiet logistical choices that spoke volumes about how seriously they were taking co-parenting. It wasn't always smooth. There were days when Caleb would cry during handoff, clinging to whichever man he was leaving. Days when Madison would send a gift without warning and unsettle the whole emotional balance. Days when Eric would call me and say, "Do you think he'll hate me one day when he finds out I'm not his real dad?" And on those days, I'd answer with what I knew was true. Caleb doesn't care about blood. He cares about the man who knows his favorite bedtime song, the man who kisses his forehead when he has a fever, the man who didn't leave even when it would have been easier. Love, I reminded him, isn't something we inherit. It's something we build. Some people use blueprints, others improvise. Eric was improvising beautifully. One Sunday, I hosted brunch. Nothing fancy, just quiche fruit salad and yes, the dinner rolls. I'd started making them again without any occasion like muscle memory for the hands. Eric came. Brandon came. Caleb showed up in mismatched socks and jelly on his chin. Even Laura dropped by for coffee and sat on the patio with me while the boys played with toy trucks in the backyard. At one point, I looked up from slicing strawberries and froze. Eric and Brandon were sitting side by side on the steps, watching Caleb dig in the flower bed. They weren't talking, just existing together. There was something so calm about it, so unlike the chaos we'd been through just months before. Laura followed my gaze and smiled. "They figured it out," she said. I nodded. "Together." She paused, then added, "So did you." Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the house had quieted again, I sat in my living room and did something I hadn't done in years. I played music, not through headphones or a phone speaker, but through the old record player Thomas and I had bought back when Eric was just learning to crawl. I pulled out a vinyl from the dusty cabinet, Etta, James at Last. The needle crackled, and then that voice, warm and honey-drenched, filled the room. I didn't dance. I didn't cry. I just listened. Because sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just finally sitting still, without feeling the weight of everything. That night, I texted Eric. "Your dad would have been proud of the father you're becoming." He wrote back almost immediately. "You're the only parent I ever needed, Mom. I see that now." And then a second message. "Also, can you send the roll recipe? I want to try making them with Caleb next weekend." I laughed out loud. A year ago, my son let me sit beside a trash can at his wedding. Now he wanted my recipe. That's the kind of full circle life rarely gives you. Hey. I printed the recipe the next morning. Handwritten messy, covered in flour smudges and memories. I folded it, slipped it into a card, and on a whim, wrote a note inside. "These rolls held us together more times than you'll ever know. Knead gently. Let rise with patience. And never, ever skip the butter." Because if I've learned anything this past year, it's this. Sometimes love isn't loud. It isn't flashy or perfect. Sometimes it's just warm bread on a cold day. I never thought a dinner roll could become a legacy. But 2 weeks after I sent that recipe to Eric, I found a picture in my inbox, little Caleb, standing on a chair at Eric's kitchen counter. His tiny hands dusted with flour, a serious look of concentration on his face. The caption read, "We forgot to let it rise, but we're calling it crunchy breadsticks. Caleb's a fan." I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen tea steeping beside me. That kind of laughter, the quiet, private kind, felt like a rare bird returning home after winter. I didn't chase it. I just let it perch and stay a while. The seasons turned. By June, the town's annual community day was approaching, and wouldn't you know it, the library was putting together a family story tree display. They invited local residents to submit a story photo or heirloom that represented their family. I almost said no. My story didn't fit the mold. It didn't begin with "once upon a time" or end with a wedding cake and 3 kids and a mortgage in the suburbs. But then again, maybe that's exactly why it belonged. I submitted a photograph, the one from the art show, Caleb reaching between Brandon and Eric, their hands just barely visible on either side of the frame. And I attached a story, just a short 1-page reflection. It began like this. Families aren't always born. Sometimes they're built board by board with truth and trust and stubborn grace. Ours was burned down, and we rebuilt it anyway. They accepted it, gave it a corner spot on the main table. People stopped. People read. I didn't go stand beside it or point to my name, but I saw them reading, saw them nodding. One woman wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. That was enough. One evening, after helping Brandon set up a new bookshelf in Caleb's room, yes, a child who already needed more shelves for books, I was proud I stayed for dinner. After we ate, Brandon handed me a manila envelope. "I didn't know if you'd want this," he said, "but it's something Madison sent." I raised an eyebrow. She mailed it to me last week, said she didn't want to intrude, that she wasn't ready to write to Eric directly, but she hoped someday. Inside the envelope was a single photograph and a letter. The photo Madison and Caleb taken before everything unraveled. She looked tired but happy. He looked confused, as if even at that young age he knew something in the picture didn't quite fit. The letter was brief. No apologies, no justifications. Just a quiet admission. I didn't know how to undo what I'd done, but I knew you would tell him the truth eventually. I hope one day you can forgive the part of me that truly loved him, even if I lied about how he came to be. I folded the letter, slipped it back inside, and handed it to Brandon. "She still doesn't get it," I said. "But that's not my burden anymore." Bane. Eric and I talked that weekend over lunch. He was quieter lately, but in a good way, less guarded, less brittle. "I'm not angry anymore," he said, pushing his fork through a tangle of spaghetti. "Is that weird?" "No," I said. "It means you've let go of something heavy. I think I just realized, if I hold on to her mistake forever, I'll never have space for what's next." I smiled. "And what is next?" He grinned boyish for a moment. "Caleb wants a dog." I nearly choked on my water. "Are you serious? You with a dog?" "Brandon's allergic and I'm the cool dad, apparently." "You're the soft dad," I teased. "Brandon's the structure." "Yeah," Eric said thoughtfully. "And it's working." He paused. "We're working." The next Sunday, I hosted my first big dinner since before the wedding. It wasn't fancy. Pasta salad and, of course, those dinner rolls. But it felt like reclaiming something. Not just tradition, but identity. Around my table sat Eric, Brandon, Caleb with jelly on his shirt, and Laura, who had brought a plum tart that tasted like forgiveness wrapped in pastry. At one point, Caleb stood on his chair and announced, "I got 2 dads." Everyone laughed. Not awkwardly, not nervously, just laughed. And then he turned to me, and Grandma made bread. That's what he called me now, not Helen, not Miss Carter, just Grandma, like it had always been that way. I reached over, brushed a crumb from his cheek, and whispered, "That's right, honey. Grandma makes the best bread." After dinner, Laura and I sat out on the balcony while the others cleaned up. "I'm not saying this wine is strong," she said, sipping, "but I just saw Caleb use a napkin without being told. Miracle behavior." I nodded. She leaned back and studied me. "You look different these days." "How so?" "Lighter, like someone took an anvil off your back." I smiled. They did. Her name was Truth. Laura laughed. "She sounds like a handful." "She is," I said, "but she's worth every bruise." That night, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in my kitchen, barefoot, rolling up the sleeves of my cardigan. There were dishes to do, crumbs on the floor, wine glasses on the counter, and I felt grateful. Not the flashy kind you post about. The kind that settles into your joints and makes them ache a little less. I thought about where I'd been exactly a year ago, sitting beside a garbage can at my only son's wedding, thinking that was the end of my story. But it wasn't. That seat wasn't the finale. It was the spark. Because the truth is, sometimes humiliation is the match that lights the path back to yourself. And once you start walking, you don't go back. Not ever. I didn't realize how far I'd come until I ran into someone from before. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was walking out of the grocery store with a bunch of kale and some fresh peaches when I heard a voice call out, "Helen." I turned, and there she was, Marcia Whitaker, former neighbor, part-time Pilates instructor, full-time gossip collector. The kind of woman who never wore the same scarf twice and somehow always knew everyone's business 2 days before they did. I hadn't seen her since the wedding. She gave me a once-over head to toe and offered a smile I'd categorize as politely stunned. "Well, you're looking great." "Thanks, Marcia," I said, clutching my grocery bag just a little tighter. "You too. Love the leopard print. Bold choice for midweek." "Oh, you know me," she said with a little toss of her hair. "So I heard things got a little dramatic after the wedding." I tilted my head. "You mean the wedding where I was seated next to a garbage can?" Her smile faltered. "That one." I nodded. "Yes, that was quite a performance. Shame there weren't awards. I might have taken home Best Supporting Actress in a Real-Life Betrayal." She chuckled, awkward and high-pitched. "Well, I'm glad to see you're doing well. You've bounced back." I let that hang in the air a second before answering. "I didn't bounce, Marcia. I climbed. There's a difference." And then I smiled warm, but with just enough edge to make her blink. "Have a good day." As I walked to my car, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. Not pride, not revenge. It was peace. That rare kind of peace you get when someone tries to poke your scars and finds no wound left to press. The truth is, being humiliated doesn't ruin you. It reintroduces you to yourself. Before all of this, I had spent years watering everyone else's garden while mine withered in the shade. I was Eric's mom. I was Madison's inconvenient mother-in-law. I was the woman who brings dinner rolls. Now, I was Helen again. Helen Carter. Librarian, storyteller, baker, grandmother, photographer, human. One evening, I got a call from Laura. Her voice was breathless. "Don't freak out," she said, "but I may have submitted your story to the Voices Over 60 podcast." I blinked. "You what?" "They loved it. The entry you gave to the library display. They want you to read it. On air." I laughed. "Laura?" "No pressure," she said quickly. "But I thought maybe it's time more people heard what real strength sounds like. You don't have to say yes, but..." That word hung there like a blinking cursor on a blank page. I said yes. The podcast was recorded 2 weeks later in a tiny studio above a coffee shop downtown. The producer, a 20-something named Max with blue glasses and a coffee addiction, gave me water and adjusted my mic with the care of someone tuning a violin. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm not nervous." He smiled. "You don't sound like someone who shakes." And I didn't, because I'd already shaken. I'd shaken the moment I was laughed at by the people I loved. The moment I learned the truth. The moment I stood up in front of a backyard full of strangers and tore a lie to pieces with nothing but my voice. Compared to that, a microphone was easy. I read my piece slowly. Honestly, no theatrical flair, just the story. My story. From garbage can to gallery wall. Max was silent when I finished. Then he leaned forward and said, "That was the realest thing I've ever heard in here." The podcast went live the following Tuesday. I didn't expect it to be a big deal, a few local listens, maybe some comments. But something strange happened. It spread. People shared it. Strangers emailed. Women I'd never met sent handwritten letters. One read, "Thank you for reminding me I'm still allowed to reclaim my life at 67. Another said, "Your story helped me leave a toxic situation I should have left years ago. I've been sitting next to my own version of that garbage can for too long." I cried that day, not because I was sad, because it mattered. My voice, long silenced by obligation and guilt and the fear of being too much, had finally found its place. Caleb started preschool in September. Brandon and Eric took him on the first day, both wearing proud dad grins and matching backpacks, because apparently coordination is now part of their parenting charm. They sent me a photo of Caleb in a little blue polo waving like he was boarding a cruise ship. Underneath, Eric had written, He asked this morning if Grandma would come to his classroom someday to read. You in? I smiled. Always. Then, that Friday, I stood in front of 20 preschoolers with a stack of picture books and butterflies in my stomach. I'd read to hundreds of kids before, at the library, at birthday parties, in living rooms filled with Legos and apple juice. But this time was different. This time, one of those little faces was part of my rebuilt family. As I flipped through the pages and did my best dragon voice, Caleb shouted from the carpet, "That's my grandma." The class gasped. One little girl said, "She's really good." Another said, "I like her earrings." I winked. I was wearing the turquoise pair again, the ones I wore the night I took my story back. Then, afterward, as we walked to the car, Caleb slipped his sticky hand into mine. "Can you read again next week?" "I'd love to," I said. And I meant it. Because this simple moment, this quiet connection meant more to me than 100 fake wedding toasts or obligatory Sunday lunches ever could. This wasn't performative. It was real. That night, I wrote in my journal again. Life doesn't give you do-overs. It gives you new chapters. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page. And I did. One story at a time. Thanksgiving arrived with a crisp bite in the air and that golden, low-hanging sunlight that makes even sidewalks look poetic. For the first time in years, I was hosting, not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted to. I set the table with my old china, the good set, the one that had survived a dozen moves, 2 decades of birthdays, and one regrettable moment involving a toddler, a cat, and a butterscotch pie. I ironed the cloth napkins, bought fresh eucalyptus and miniature pumpkins for the centerpiece, lit a cinnamon candle an hour before anyone arrived, just long enough to make the house smell like comfort. Eric was the first to show up carrying a roasted vegetable tart from a local bakery that cost more than my monthly utilities. He walked in, looked around and said, "Wow, you did all this." I grinned. "Of course, you're not the only one who's gotten a second act." Brandon arrived a few minutes later with Caleb, who was wearing a turkey hat made from construction paper and absolute confidence. "I'm a gobble baby," he shouted, running toward me like I was the finish line at a candy race. Laura came, too, invited not as a guest, but as part of the fabric now. She brought a pumpkin cheesecake and a deck of conversation cards with prompts like, "What are you most grateful for that you never expected?" I was grateful she didn't try to play therapist about it. She just slipped the deck next to the bread basket and winked. Dinner was loud and messy and absolutely perfect. Caleb refused turkey but ate 3 servings of mashed potatoes. Eric and Brandon gently debated the best superhero movie of all time. Turns out it's a tie between Black Panther and Into the Spider-Verse. Laura and I didn't care, but we weighed in anyway because that's what family does. We show up for each other's trivia. At one point, Laura drew a card from the deck and read aloud, "Describe a moment this year when you surprised yourself." Silence fell. Not in a bad way, in a processing way. Eric finally cleared his throat. "I didn't think I could let go of the idea of being Caleb's only dad," he said. "But now I can't imagine him without Brandon in his life. I surprised myself by choosing what's best for him instead of what felt best for me." Brandon nodded, visibly moved. Caleb, oblivious, licked whipped cream off a spoon. Then Laura looked at me. I took a breath. I surprised myself by finding a voice I thought I'd lost, I said, and by using it even when it made things uncomfortable, maybe especially then. Everyone nodded. And just like that, we passed into a quieter, more tender version of the night, the kind where dishes get stacked without being asked and nobody rushes out the door when the plates are clean. No. After the guests left and the dishwasher hummed, I stood at the kitchen sink and stared at my reflection in the window. The woman in the glass looked calm, not flawless, but centered. That night, I lit a second candle, poured myself a small glass of wine, and pulled out the memory box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were snapshots: Eric at 5 in a Batman cape, Thomas smiling next to a tent that collapsed 10 minutes later, me in my 20s, with hair like a disco ball. At the very bottom was a folded letter. It was from my own mother, written the day I gave birth. "You're going to mess up, Helen. That's just life. But if you love that child honestly and fight for him when no one else will, you'll have done more than enough." I read it twice. Then I added something new to the box, a printout of the DNA results. Not to dwell on the lie, but to honor the moment I chose truth. I sealed the box again and slid it back under the bed. Not hidden, just at rest. Yes. 2 weeks later, I ran into someone unexpected at the co-op, Melody Madison's sister. She looked different, less polished, more real. "Hi," she said, adjusting her tote bag. "I didn't think I'd run into you here." I smiled politely. "I live just down the street now." She hesitated. "I don't want to intrude, but I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up. I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't want to cause trouble." "That's understandable," I said. "People avoid truth when it's inconvenient." She nodded, swallowing hard. "How's Caleb?" "Thriving." "And Eric?" "Building a beautiful life." Melody blinked quickly. "That's good. That's really good." Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I brought this in case I saw you. It's a photo of Madison and Caleb from before. You can toss it if you want. I just thought maybe he'd want it one day." I took it. Not out of sentiment, but because I understood now. Life isn't a clean ledger. It's a layered one. "Thank you," I said. We parted there between bulk quinoa and fair trade coffee beans. And I felt no bitterness. None. That night, I gave Caleb the photo. "This is your mommy," I said gently, "when you were very small." He looked at it confused for a moment, then handed it back. "I like this one better," he said, pointing to the fridge where a recent drawing of the three of us, Eric, Brandon, and me, hung beside his alphabet magnets. And then he ran off to play with his trucks. Children always know what matters. It's us adults who complicate things. I curled up on the couch later with my journal and wrote, "Closure doesn't always arrive with apologies. Sometimes it shows up quietly wrapped in mashed potatoes and art projects. And that's enough." I'd always thought Christmas would be the hardest. After everything that had happened after the broken marriage, the truths unraveled like yarn. The betrayal, the burned bridges, what did Christmas even look like now? Would it be 3 separate trees, 3 fractured schedules, polite, text messages instead of carols and cocoa? But as it turned out, Christmas came anyway. It came on a snowy Thursday morning with frost edging the windows and the smell of cinnamon rolls rising in my kitchen. It came not with fanfare, but with simplicity. Eric called me the week before. "Brandon and I talked, and we were wondering if you'd host this year." I blinked. "You mean Christmas?" "Yeah," he said. "You always made it feel like something real. We thought maybe Caleb should grow up with that too." I didn't answer right away. I thought about the last Christmas I'd hosted. Madison had criticized the garland, said my ornaments looked a little vintage code for old lady. Eric had laughed, not maliciously, but in that dismissive way that can cut deeper than outright cruelty. That was 2 years ago. It felt like someone else's life now. "I'd love to," I said. So I pulled out the decorations from the hall closet. I set up my small tree, the one with the slightly lopsided top, and strung the same lights Thomas and I had bought at a gas station on Christmas Eve, back when we were young and broke and too in love to care about matching sets. I made sugar cookies shaped like stars and mittens. I hung 3 stockings, one for Eric, one for Caleb, and one labeled Grandma, stitched unevenly by a 7-year-old Eric decades ago. And on Christmas morning, when the knock came at the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Joy. Yes. Caleb bounded in first, dragging a tote bag full of Legos and wrapped packages. He was wearing reindeer pajamas and a grin big enough to power a snowplow. "Merry Christmas," he shouted. Brandon followed, holding a casserole dish. Eric brought the coffee. They stepped into the house like they belonged, because they did. We opened presents around the tree. Caleb squealed over his toy fire truck. Eric unwrapped a new watch from Brandon and a photo album from me. Inside were pictures from Caleb's first year, some of Eric, some of Brandon, all of them included. "This is amazing," Eric said, flipping through it. "Thank you." Brandon smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't have a baby book for him. This feels like one." "It is one," I said. "It's just got more than one author." After breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, those infamous dinner rolls, we settled on the couch with cocoa and mismatched blankets. Caleb sat between his 2 dads, utterly content. I watched them from my armchair, holding my own mug, and thought, this is the kind of quiet that takes years to earn. At one point, Caleb climbed into my lap and pulled at the chain around my neck. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to my pendant. "It's a locket," I said, opening it carefully. Inside were 2 tiny photos, one of Eric as a toddler and one of Caleb taken just last month. "Can I be in there forever?" he whispered. I smiled. "You already are." That afternoon, we walked to the park. Snow covered the ground in pillowy silence. Eric and Brandon took turns pulling Caleb on a plastic sled, laughing and sliding more than steering. Laura met us there, bundled in a blue coat with a thermos of peppermint tea. She slipped her arm through mine as we watched the 3 of them tumble into a snowbank. "Looks like a Christmas card from an alternative universe," she said. "Or a better one," I replied. Down. We spent the rest of the evening playing board games and reading stories. Caleb fell asleep halfway through the snowy day, curled up between his 2 fathers, snoring gently. Eric carried him to the spare room, his sleepover bed, and when he came back, he sat beside me on the couch. "I didn't know this was possible," he said. "All of us. Like this." I reached over and took his hand. "We don't always get the life we imagined, Eric. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to let go, we get the life we need." He nodded, his eyes shining just slightly. "Merry Christmas, Mom." "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." After they left, after the dishes were done and the lights dimmed and the tree glowed gently in the corner, I sat down with my journal and wrote, "Today I saw the future I never knew I was allowed to want. A table full of truth, a child surrounded by love, and the beautiful, imperfect people who built something whole from all the broken parts." The quiet of the house settled around me like a blanket. Not lonely, not heavy, just full. And as I turned the final page of my journal, I smiled to myself. There was room for another. Spring brought lilacs and second chances. The air turned softer. The sun lingered longer, and my neighborhood, once stoic in the silence of winter, began to bloom with small joys. Windows opened. Sidewalk chalk reappeared. And on one unexpected Tuesday, I found a note tucked under my doormat. It was handwritten. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. "Helen, I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope for understanding. I know I hurt you. I know I humiliated you. And I know now, too late, that what I did was cruel. I don't expect Eric to respond to me, or Brandon. But if one day Caleb asks questions, please tell him I loved him, even if I didn't know how to love anyone else properly. I've started therapy. I've moved back in with my parents. I'm trying. I'm sorry." Madison. I sat on my front step for a long time after reading it. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And in the messy mosaic of all we'd been through, that mattered. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. But I folded the letter, slipped it into the same memory box where I'd placed the DNA results, and whispered to the universe, "Thank you for giving her a mirror." And around the same time, I was invited to speak at the Community Center's Voices of Renewal panel, a gathering of women over 60 who'd faced change, loss, reinvention, heartbreak, discovery, and came out the other side with stories to share. I almost said no, but Laura raised an eyebrow and said, "You've told the truth. Now let them hear it." So I stood on that small stage beneath dim lights and the scent of old wood floors and folding chairs and read an excerpt from my journal. I told them about the garbage can. I told them about the spoon in the plastic bag. I told them about holding my son while the lie unraveled and becoming someone new in the ruins. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. And then applause. Real applause. From women with stories behind their eyes and laughter that came from hard-earned joy. One woman, gray braids, leather boots, a cane carved with vines, came up to me after and said I sat by my own metaphorical garbage can for 30 years. "You just gave me permission to stand up." That night I didn't just sleep, I rested. Caleb turned 4 in April. The party was at the same park as his first birthday, but this time everything felt more rooted. Eric brought balloons. Brandon made peanut butter cupcakes with almond butter alternatives because preschoolers come with allergy lists longer than grocery receipts. I brought my camera, and not just for candids. I'd been photographing local families, couples, even pets. It started small, but word spread. A few of my photos were now framed in the pediatrician's office and the cafe near the rec center. Someone had called me the memory maker of Maple Grove. I didn't correct them. At the party, Caleb ran up to me with cake on his nose and a grin that stretched wider than the Mississippi. Grandma, look what Papa got me. It was a red kite shaped like a dragon. I helped him hold the string. The wind lifted it quickly, tugging and dancing alive in the sky. I want it to fly forever, he shouted. I knelt beside him, holding his sticky hand. Then you'll have to let it go a little, I said. That's how flying works. He didn't understand. Not yet. But I did. Later that evening, after the party ended and the sun began its golden descent behind the trees, Eric pulled me aside. I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice softer than usual. Dangerous, I teased. He smiled. Brandon and I talked. We've both been raising Caleb, but you saved all of us. I shook my head. I just told the truth. And you protected him when I couldn't see it, he said. That matters. Then he handed me a small box. No occasion, no expectation. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. On the underside was engraved, Matriarch, Guardian, Truth Teller. I didn't cry, not right then. But when I hugged him, when I felt his arms around me without distance or doubt, I closed my eyes and let that quiet ache rise. The kind of ache that says, you made it. You're safe now. That night, as I lay in bed with the bracelet still on my wrist, I wrote in my journal, I'm no longer afraid of silence, because I know my voice lives in the people I've helped shape. My story isn't about revenge. It's about rising, about becoming louder than the people who tried to unwrite me. Then I closed the journal, turned off the light, and drifted off the bracelet warm against my skin. I had one part left to write, but in that moment, I wasn't worried. Because this time, I wasn't telling my story to survive. I was telling it to live. The morning of the Art Center exhibition felt like the calm after a storm, the kind of quiet you don't quite trust until you've had your second cup of tea. The gallery had selected one of my photos, a candid shot of Caleb running between Eric and Brandon, the sun backlighting his curls, all three of them, mid-laugh. I titled it, 3 Points of a Whole. The caption read, families aren't defined by DNA or even the people who stay. Sometimes they're born in the fire of truth, held together by forgiveness, and made stronger by choice. I stood there the evening of the show in a deep green wrap dress, my silver bracelet glinting under soft lights. Laura was by my side holding a glass of Prosecco and smiling like she'd known all along I'd end up here. Eric arrived first with Caleb balanced on his hip like an accessory he refused to put down. There she is, Caleb shouted, spotting me. Grandma's picture is here. Brandon followed close behind camera slung over his shoulder, ever the quiet observer, now turned friend. He gave me a warm nod and mouthed, "You did it." "No, we did." "Oh." The gallery buzzed with people that night, neighbors, fellow artists, even the mayor's assistant, who handed me a business card with a wink and said, "We're always looking for public art commissions." I thanked her and tucked it into my purse. I wasn't chasing success. I was simply honoring the path that had opened the moment I chose to see. Not just what was in front of me, but who I'd become. After the event, the five of us, Eric, Brandon, Caleb, Laura, and I went out for ice cream at the little shop on Jefferson Avenue. We sat in a booth with sticky tabletops and overhead lighting that hummed faintly, and it felt like the most luxurious table in the world. Caleb announced that his chocolate scoop tasted like dragon fire, and that he planned to become a snowman astronaut scientist when he grew up. Ambitious Brandon said. "I blame the books," Eric added, giving me a sideways smile. "You're welcome," I replied. We clinked spoons instead of glasses. No toasts, no performance. Just the quiet ease of a family that had been shattered, then rebuilt. Beat. On the drive home, Caleb fell asleep in the back seat, still clutching the Art Center brochure with my picture circled in pink crayon. Eric walked me to my front door. "You know," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets like he used to as a teenager when he had something big to say. I was angry for a long time. Not just at Madison, at myself. For being fooled, for not listening to you, for everything. I turned toward him, waiting. But I think maybe I had to go through it to grow. You gave me that space without disappearing. I touched his cheek gently. I never would have left you. I just needed you to remember who I was. He nodded, tears barely held back. You're my mother, my guidepost, the one who sees when the rest of us are blind. I smiled. Even when I'm seated next to a trash can. He laughed, and it was real, especially then. That night, I stood at my window and watched the moon rise slow and pale over the rooftops. The kind of moon that doesn't ask for attention, just keeps showing up. And I realized that was who I'd become. Not loud, not perfect, but consistent. Still here, still standing, still me. The next morning, I opened a new journal. The cover was blue linen, crisp and unmarked. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "This is not the story of a woman broken by betrayal. It's the story of a woman who refused to stay small, who learned that silence can be louder than screams, and that dignity once reclaimed becomes unshakable." Hey everyone, if you've made it this far, thank you. This journey wasn't always easy to tell. It was emotional, messy, raw, but it was real. Maybe you've felt small before, invisible, cast aside. Maybe you've had to sit next to your own metaphorical trash can while people laughed. But let me tell you something. You're not garbage. You are steel. You are flame. And one day, the people who underestimated you will realize that you were the fire all along. Now take a deep breath, exhale the pain, and choose yourself. Because I did, and I've never felt more alive. Tonight, as we dim the lights and let the story settle, I want to leave you with something gentle, a whisper for your soul. You've walked with me through shadows and ashes, through betrayal and clarity, through a story that started with humiliation and ended in self-possession. Thank you for staying, for listening. Not all stories come with neat bows or poetic justice, but some come with something better, a new chapter handwritten in courage. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever been the one left off the seating chart, if you've ever had to sit with your dignity beside the unspoken, know this. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not too late. The people who love you now, the people who see you fully, those are your family. Whether they're connected by blood or simply by choice, they are the ones who matter. And your voice? It's not too quiet. It's not too much. It's exactly enough. So wherever you are lying in bed, curled in a blanket, letting your day melt away, I hope you know your story is not over. It's just waiting for your pen. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to write it in your own voice. Good night, my friend. Stay brave, stay soft, stay true. We'll meet again in another story.